Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to be getting started shortly here. We have a couple of minutes, so I'm just going to be setting up the webinar and all that. Feel free to grab your lunch or another cup of coffee or whatever you'd like and get settled in.
Hey, Andre, how you doing?
Good, Blas. How are you doing?
Okay. I just got out of my budget meeting and doesn't look very promising.
I've seen that movie before, so I hope
Yes,
the best for you, you and the team
that
over
rerun is very popular.
there. Yeah, it is. Yes, it is.
Well, how are things in Chemscoda world?
Things at Shumscoda are good, busy but good. They've got the whole team kind of, I would say, spread out at the moment. Um,
You guys have a hiring freeze, don't you?
no, not that
Um,
not that I'm
I
aware of.
uh, I reached out to Steve and
Oh,
I was talking to him about possible job openings, like maybe a plans examiner, and he said, "Well, unfortunately, we have a hiring freeze."
oh, well, he would know better than I would. So, I
Yeah, I
mean,
would think
I'm
so.
I'm a lowly plans examiner and inspector and trainer. So, if he told you that, I'm sure he had good cause. But yeah.
Yeah, you're not lowly. Trust me, Andrew. Andre, you're not. You're a very important part of the organization and we look up to you.
Well, that's very kind, Blas. It's good to hear from you. Good to see everybody joining us for lunch here. I'm going to be taking everybody off of mute. So if you'd like to jump in and chat or ask for a pause or anything like that, feel free. We can
Oh,
definitely.
for a minute there, I thought you were going to say, I'm going to take everybody out to lunch.
That would be one heck of a road trip to pick up everybody in the crew. So yeah, let me just finish getting set up here for us and get the presentation shared. And let's see here. That's not what we want. Hang on a second. Let me fix that guy. There we go. Let's see here. Share options. Advanced portion screen. Share. Okay, now we look like we know what we're doing here. Well, awesome. Let me go through the chat once more here. Make sure that anybody that's joined us more recently can jump off a mute if they so wish. And yeah, looks like we've got everybody that's signed in right now. So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining me for lunch today. It's going to be an honor and a privilege to spend a little bit of time with you today talking about multifamily energy use. Today we're going to be talking about two codes, the 21 and the 24, and kind of doing a comparison between them. And so I've got everybody that's attending here able to come off a mute if they want to jump in with a question. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, no problem. Go ahead and put it in the chat or something like that, and I will probably have to get to it more towards the end of the presentation if that's all right with you. But otherwise, we should be able to go ahead and kind of get started here. I want to be respectful of everybody's time and make sure that we use as much as we can of it to talk about what you're here for, which is, about codes. So, with that, if you do come off a mute, just please remember to put yourself back on mute. No one wants to catch a phone call you have to take for the office or a meeting with one of your employees or anything. So just please make sure that if you do come off a mute that you put yourself back on mute, okay? But otherwise, we're gonna go ahead and get started and jump right in. So here's what we've got going for you today. We've got an agenda that looks like this. We're going to talk about scoping. Multifamily is a unique place for a number of reasons, right? Not only are we covering two codes, but we also have to think in terms of where it aligns with the IBC, the IRC, and then the IECC, right? Because not all of those, not all the time, especially in multifamily, do they play nice together. We're going to talk about some new definitions that are contained in the 24 code. We're going to talk about lighting and power requirements after that. That's going to be a major component of what's changed. There are, in all honesty, this could be multiple parts of a webinar if you really wanted to get into all the contents that have been focused in this space. We could do 2 or 3 parts on this very easily. Um, and then we're going to move on to pools, spas, exterior heating, some of the things that are the amenities that people really look forward to having at their apartment buildings or things like that, and kind of how we're seeing that change, how we're seeing that handled in the 21 versus the 24. And then we'll wrap up with kind of the normal stuff that we do about our upcoming trainings, a little conclusion time, hopefully some Q&A in case we have any stuff in the chat or anything that sort of is brought up at the end there. So let's make it your time. Let's make it effective for you. If you have anything that you want to bring up or talk about, feel free to jump on in for the rest of the process here. So with that, let's talk about the energy code, right? So when we talk about the energy code, when are we talking about a commercial building? And so the first thing we need to parse out is the definition of residential, because as we're going to see, we have sort of a catch-all definition that fits commercial. So for residential buildings, what we identify, right, are 1 and 2 family dwellings right off the bat, multiple single family dwellings like townhouses. And then where it really hits this sort of tie-in with our multifamily, right? We're going to talk about R2s. We're going to talk about R4s. We're going to talk about these places where we're building apartment buildings, where we're building condos, where we're building more things that typically have sort of like a common area. We have amenities associated with them that people usually expect when they buy into a place like that, where they don't have their own yard and their own space. They want some of those amenities to be provided to them. And part of that includes exterior energy use or common area energy use and how that's getting identified in the code. So, that can happen too with townhomes. There's no getting around it. But typically townhomes are going to be a lot more single family oriented for each of those buildings. And they may have an additional clubhouse building or something like that that might be on site, but might be a B occupancy or something more akin to that, maybe some A related occupancies, maybe some pool space and things like that. So it's important for us to think about this because if I'm building R2s, I'm carrying the IBC with me, right? If I'm the building inspector on that site, that is the book that I will be carrying with me throughout the job. But we can be building 3-story R2s that would qualify as residential, like this building behind us, right? So this is 3 stories tall. It's going to qualify as residential when it comes to the IECC, whereas basically the same construction, same unit, but on the left here, we have a kind of a soft story. We have this garage area here, and that is going to upconvert this to being commercial according to the energy code because it's crossing that 4-story threshold, even though we'd be building both of these out of the IBC. So it's an important place that we try and keep in mind, how we identify that. And then where are the lines, right? So if I'm building out of the IECC and I'm in residential, are there places or pointers that take me back to the commercial code requirements of maybe exterior lighting uses? We'll see that's a common one. That's a good example, especially when it comes to the 21, but a number of other places. So residential building has a very clear definition. We're talking about, as we said, single family dwellings, R2, R3, R4, below 4 stories. So 3 stories or less in grade plane. Blas, you have a question, sir?
Yeah, when you when you're defining a residential building,
Mhm.
what if there is a complete basement in it? Would that push it into a commercial or is it still residential?
Great question. So yeah, because the definition is specific to the use of grade plane, and especially in the 24, we now have a defined term of what grade plane is. If you had a full basement and that is below grade, then we're still talking about 3 stories or less in height above grade plane. So you still would have that ability to say, no, this is still a residential building according to these provisions and this scoping parameter. Now, it is important to remember as well, though, that there are differences in how you define grade plane between residential and commercial. So when we're talking about residential buildings, it's that 50-50 split, right? That we're typically all used to looking at our walkout basements, especially in Colorado, right? We have a ton of those where we see that 50% above grade or 50% below grade wall. That's how we're going to treat it according to those code parameters. But in commercial, it's 80-20. So that can also significantly kind of change the way we approach that. So what you'd want to see if you wanted to parse that out, Blas, or you wanted to address that, is that plan review. You want to see that grade line. You want to see where they're declaring that space, if that's going to be part of the residence, right? What kind of use that space is. And then you're going to want to be able to make sure, okay, this fits the parameters for being below grade. That means that I can still build this as residential according to the energy code. Whereas if it doesn't fit that, then it falls under this catch-all definition of commercial building. So for this code, all buildings that are not deemed residential are thereby considered commercial. And that's kind of our separation on that. Great question to bring up about grade plane, and not something that I actually had in the slideshow to go over. So thank you very much for bringing that up, Les.
No problem.
So on mixed use, we have another item that we have to bring up here. So on mixed use buildings, we can oftentimes see instances where we're going to mix the provisions of the two codes together. So this can be a residential building. Let's say you had 2 stories of residential on top of a story of commercial, like we see with some of this podium type construction on our left and right here. So if we look at those, we might be able to say, okay, what'll end up happening here is the bottom story, because it is commercial by nature and is not a residential use, boom, that's commercial. However, those multiple stories above grade can be treated as residential units because we're still not exceeding that 3 stories in height threshold that's in our scoping section here. So really important to get that right. Some of the ways that you might see this dealt with here are things like using a res check and com check in tandem together, in terms of developing like your thermal envelope, potentially also some of your exterior lighting compliance. Interior lighting compliance for that commercial space. And you could use those documents together, but you would see areas where you'd say have residential, you'd have a roof on it, but you'd have no floor system, right? The commercial would have floor, it would have walls, it wouldn't have a roof system because that's effectively part of the thermal envelope for the building. So by marrying those 2 reports together and looking at the building in its totality, you can say, okay, I can see a comprehensive thermal envelope, and then I can also say that we're applying the right types of other requirements like our electrical, like our plumbing, all of that stuff, based on the use of those thermal envelopes. So again, it really comes back to the issue of picking an effective compliance path that makes sense for the project and helping, clarify to the designer what that's going to look for. Blas, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, one more.
Yeah.
Okay, so in your picture, you show some businesses on the first level.
No.
So how many levels above the business can you have and still be considered a residential code for the other uses above?
Yeah, so going back to your residential building definition out of the IECC, you're going to take that 3 stories or less in height above grade plane. So when you're asking that, you'd have 1 story of commercial, 2 stories of residential, and that could fit the bill of being still 3 stories or less above grade plane, right? So it's going to fit that definition of still being residential, even though it's sitting on top of a commercial structure. We would have our typical podium assembly out of the IBC, right? So that's our 3-hour fire separation. There's a lot of parts of that would be built out of the IBC, but for the purposes of the energy code, we'd still be talking about a building where we could apply a lot of things where we're less than those 3 stories. We can still use some of our mechanical ventilation requirements, the same dampers that we would for any other 3-story building, right? There's a number of pieces and parts that fit the bill for that 3 stories or less above grade plane. So great question again for follow-up.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So yeah, now we're going to move on to some definitions for you guys, right? So I promised going over a few of these, and I'm trying to highlight what I feel are the most important ones for this discussion, because I think so much of this really has to do with how we parse out the scoping requirements. And so one of the first definitions we get in the 24 is common areas, and this is conditioned spaces within Group R occupancy buildings that are not dwelling units or sleeping units. So remember how I was talking about earlier, a lot more of these apartment buildings, as we've typically seen, have the coffee bar area, the lobby and package area, maybe some common rooms for people to be able to use, maybe like all-purpose rooms, like an additional kitchen or things like that. That's not a dwelling unit. It's not associated with anybody's actual dwelling unit, but it's more of a shared amenity space and things like that. And so we we have these identified now as being these common areas within Group R, specifically in the code, right? And there's good reason for that. Not only is it consumer preference, and it's important that we recognize that, get it into the code so we can parse that out, but I think it's also following this train of logic where a lot of folks are pointing out that, okay, we've gotten a lot out of the thermal envelope, and there still is more to get, but it's incrementally more expensive to get, maybe a little bit less bang for your buck. I was at a training the other day where Hope mentioned, basically she said something to the effect of, how would you show me the difference between an R100 and an R1000? Right? What's the difference going to be other than cost? And from a performance standpoint, it is going to diminish, was her point, right? Is there probably something you gain out of that? Sure. Is it enough to justify, multiple changes to the code or things like that? That's where that sort of are you getting your money back over the lifetime of the building question comes up. So instead, by parsing out these areas that are considered common areas versus dwelling units, there's more of an opportunity to fine tune in that multifamily space. Places where we are serving that area with more commercial grade heating, mechanical equipment, right? These are areas that are not subject to the same dwelling unit provisions or same testing, things like that, right? These are identified separately. And so they're going to be targeted probably a little bit more for some of the mechanical efficiencies that they can get, lighting efficiencies that they can get, things like that. These common areas, it would make a lot of sense for like the lights to turn off in them relatively more quickly, less power use than some of the areas associated with your dwelling unit, for instance. So it's a good example of places where we can start to highlight and find opportunities to be able to, gain some additional energy efficiency. So we have living space, right? So this is again defined. It's a new defined term. Space within dwelling unit for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, bathing, washing, sanitation purposes. Basically all the space that you typically use in, your studio apartment and your regular home. And that's meant to juxtapose this area of occupiable spaces, right? These are areas where we are primarily there for like kind of single use or purpose, like a storage room, an equipment room, things to be occupied occasionally and for short periods of time is how the definition reads. And so again, we're parsing out these areas where we say, okay, this is very much sort of the purview of where somebody lives, eats, sleeps, all of that stuff all the time. These are the places that we can identify that are not used in the same way. I want to really bring this up because the definition out of the IBC is similar but different when we talk about occupiable spaces. So it reads a room or enclosed space designed for human occupancy in which people congregate for amusement, educational purposes, and occupants may be engaged in labor, things like that. And we still have to provide the means of ingress, the light, ventilation, sanitation requirements of the code for what you need there, right? But it is a different definition, and it is one where you do want to be clear about its use when you're talking about the energy code versus something out of the IBC, especially when we have this overlap in multifamily spaces. So just to bring a little bit of attention to that. So for those that are just joining, by the way, I'm going to give you the opportunity to be able to come off of mute if you want to ask a question. If that's not your style, feel free to put it in the chat, and I will definitely try to get to it by the end of the presentation. But if you feel like interrupting me or saying go back a slide or something like that, feel free to jump in. So space conditioning is another defined term now because we were just talking about conditioned spaces in common areas, right? That are, shared spaces that are not associated directly with any dwelling. While having a definition of space conditioning also helps clarify exactly what the intent is there. So this is the area where we are controlling the temperature, the humidity, the filtration, and distribution of air that makes it a conditioned space, right? We also have a definition of equipment. So we talk about heat exchangers, air handling units, and you notice both of those are italicized, meaning both of those also have a definition in this code as well. Filter boxes, any of the apparatus connecting that to space conditioning. So we can definitely see these through lines of identifying the different spaces, the different equipment, the different uses, and how that's going to translate to probably future iterations of the code and kind of what's targeted in the 24 for trying to find some incremental improvements. So one of the things that I want to bring to your attention is when you have systems, mechanical systems, or surface water heating systems that serve multiple dwelling units. If you do, you're going to go straight. This is your pointer to say, okay, if you're serving more than one unit, you are going to jump over to your commercial provisions. And you have C403, C404 identified expressly there, right? So this is again one of those places where we're going to say, okay, dwelling units that are self-contained, these will be out of the residential code. If that's not happening in the same way, then we'll jump over to a more commercial opportunity. Oh, the chat is disabled. Thank you for letting me know, Brian. Let me fix that. I did not realize. So let me do something about that for you. Right. Everyone. Okay, there we go. I apologize for that. Should be fixed now. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate you bringing it up. So now we're going to move towards some lighting and power related stuff. Because like I said, this is kind of meat and potatoes for some of this comparison and a lot of that comparative change between the 21 and the 24 code. So these are going to be our kind of big target sort of areas and what we're talking about here. Total power allowance, lighting controls, natural gas lighting, which isn't really a big part of this, so to speak, but it is a important component that's seen a lot of changes in the 21 and the 24, and just want to make you aware of that. And then electrical metering and reporting as well, monitoring, that whole sort of gamut has been changed quite a bit. So in the 21, we basically say, hey, your exterior lighting is going to meet the provisions of C405, with the exceptions of single-family homes, two-family dwellings, townhouses, and then solar-powered luminaries. We have a few options here where we can basically say, okay, we will let you, sort of off the hook with this. But in general, we're saying that even though you're a multifamily building, we're going to point you to the commercial requirements of the lighting requirements for you, right? And so when we read over this, we go to C405.5, right? That's our pointer. And we have a lot of exceptions that are tied into this. And we basically have a procedure that we have to follow if we're going to do this process. And so remember, the current way that I'm kind of establishing this for you, let me go back a slide here. I'm looking at the residential code in the 21. So let's say I had a building that was 3 stories of R2. And now this is telling me, hey, for your exterior lighting, go to C405. Now, if it's 4 stories or 5 stories of R2, I'm doing that anyway. I'm still going to C405. So basically, this is sort of the catch-all for multifamily related construction as it relates to exterior lighting. So when we look at this, we have this procedure that we're going to go through, and we're going to pick a lighting zone from a table. We're going to use the base allowance plus the individual allowances for these areas to figure out how much in lighting power that I can actually provide, and then add it up to demonstrate that we stay under the wattage. And just so you're clear, this is the same procedure that your CommCheck exterior lighting certificate is doing for you. It's looking at these areas, it's looking at your square footages, it's looking at the declaration of what these areas are in comparison to that table, and then giving you that answer. So just in case you're curious. So the first thing you do is look at, okay, what space are you in? You pick one of these zones, and then from there, we're going to start making some decisions. Now, the zones here, as they're written, I think it's relatively clear what it's describing. I find it interesting that lighting zone 3 is just sort of this catch-all that doesn't fit 1, 2, or 4. But let's see that as to kind of what that really means. This comes from DOE, and I kind of like this graphic, all things considered, because it shows us, okay, in zone 1, we've got that sort of forested or rural area out there. We've got zone 2, which is a little bit more suburban. We've got zone 3, which again is not clearly defined, but it's meant to be that catch-all that doesn't fit, our suburban areas, our small strip mall, and, incidental commercial, our gas stations, our small shops, things like that, barber shops, and, whatever else, fast food joints, the kind of stuff that dots around typical suburban areas. And then we also have a commercial sector located in that little downtown area there, where we have high rises, where we have extreme power density compared to some of these other areas. Now, one of the reasons I want to bring this up is because historically speaking, this is something typically within planning and zoning's purview for wherever you work at, right? They typically look at photometrics, they look at that sort of character of the environment sort of issue and say, okay, this is our purview. We're going to say that that's too much light, you got to bring it down. And a lot of jurisdictions have been looking or thinking about things like dark sky lighting. So it's really important that if you're looking at adopting a new code or addressing this in your code in the future, that you're aligning with any of those other provisions, because these have just been historically places that building hasn't done the lion's share of the work on. And now we're really looking at this with significantly more intensity, so to speak. So we jump over to our lighting allowances, right? And we start looking at some of the things that were here, and we see that this is broken up by those corresponding zones. So the first thing that, as a designer, what you'd be proposing or as a code official would be reviewing is, do I agree with the zone that they picked? Okay, great. They said it's suburban. It's, a small multifamily, say R2 complex. Great. This seems to fit the bill. This makes sense for this zone. Now we're going to look at that base power allowance, and we're going to start adding up all of these areas, right? So we're going to look at those square footage areas versus, some of these other areas where they're measured in a linear foot, because that's typically how that lighting is going to be provided, is say with walkways and ramps. You're not looking to illuminate that whole area. You're looking to illuminate specifically the area around that ramp or around that walking surface. But you see them, roughly speaking, trying to be germane to exactly what it is that they're trying to do, right? What area or that they're trying to light up or what they're trying to provide in the space. So we add all that up. We also look at the fact that we have some additional allowances. Now, the additional allowances do work a little bit differently. We've got some specific areas where we might say, okay, additional lighting is warranted. We're not going to say that it contributes in the same way to the total power allowance here for things like an ATM. We have building facades located here. We have uncovered entrances, inspection procedure areas, drive up windows and doors. And we can see why that would make a lot of sense for the security of the folks working those areas, the ability to check on, passersby or cars coming in and out, if that's the case. 24-hour retail entrances as well. So we kind of get this idea that, okay, we're going to exempt some of these spaces that are specific to, some of those uses that we might also find with multifamily where we have somebody checking on a vehicle, things like that. So let's look at the 24 code, and I'm just going to kind of highlight the changes for you because not a ton changed in here, but some clarification did. So we add language here that the watt allowance to the building and the site related to that building, to add a little bit of clarity, because, right, if you get, say, a guard check for an R2 as you come up the driveway or something like that, oftentimes, that little shack might be metered by itself, it might not be. It also is usually part of the overall site as it's developed, right? And as it's reviewed. So again, this is one of those places that's a little tricky because we're talking about some of the places where sometimes zoning has that first sort of right of refusal of how we're going to parse this whole thing out versus how we usually conduct it, which is, okay, we're just evaluating each building on that site. Here we're looking a little bit more holistically. We see some updates to the tables in the 24, so a lot of blue in these places. We see tighter densities overall, so the base power allowances have gone down. Some of these individual areas for what's allowed have gone down. One that I really want to highlight for you here is stairways, right? A lot of folks, when this first came out, had significant concerns about the issue of limiting light in areas meant for egress and what that could mean. I mean, stairways, tripping hazards, right? They're like the number one reason that you get a lawsuit on a building. They're typically what we find to be dangerous areas in buildings. And, the handrails, all the safety appurtenances that we put there are typically for the folks that are going to have the hardest time traversing those areas, right? They're for everybody. But, I've heard multiple good code officials, good trainers say that, the code is made for old ladies and young kids. Right, we're going to try and protect those that can't easily navigate the world or protect themselves. And stairways definitely falls into one of those places where people easily get hurt. And so that exemption, makes a lot of sense, across the board there. But you can take a look for yourself at some of the other items here that have changed. That whole table, is now published in blue. We also see our individual lighting zones, same thing. We've got a little bit more density, or excuse me, less power available for the density of the area is what I should say. But still, relatively speaking, similar to what it was in the 21 with updates, right? And so big sort of highlights of these changes. The base power allowances are much less than what was in the 21. In a lot of places, they're half, but it varies by the zone. The exemption for the staircases is definitely something to remember, and definitely, in my mind, a good change and advantage to the 24. Reduces the wattage per square foot, so making all of these areas more energy efficient. And then rewrites table 405.5.2.3 to make all items subject to zoning light requirements. Now remember that we had 14 exceptions, right, for the areas where we would say that the total connected power might not be calculated or included. And so we're going to go over those exceptions, and we're going to go over kind of what changed in the 24 for this. So one, right out of the gate, we say things approved by the code official for safety considerations. Remember, approved isn't a defined term, and that requires discretion by the code official to demonstrate approval. This is a place where having a clear policy about how you define what a safety consideration is and how somebody might apply to use that exemption makes a lot of sense, because it is very vague in the code as it is written. And you could save a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of headache by making sure your staff is on the same page. So one person isn't just approving any lighting that somebody says, well, it's, important for safety. Whereas maybe you have another one who's saying, no, not at all. Like, you really have to demonstrate, like, keeping a very high threshold of what safety is and using their own discretion, finding some middle ground in there where somebody can make a case, or explain why this is important to their business model for a safety perspective, or things like that. And that includes multifamily areas, right? So, if there are certain walkways or things like that that might abut a specific area, that people have concerns about, maybe by train stations, bus stops, things like that, where you have a lot of traffic or things like that. Those could be areas that would make possible sense. But once again, needs to be specific, needs to be something that you outline a good rationale why, so you're not accused of prejudicial enforcement on any one particular issue or item. Emergency lighting makes a lot of sense, right? We're not going to calculate that in along with exit signs. We're requiring that light to be installed. We definitely don't want that to say, well, now we have to limit or make dimmer the overall building because you got to provide the exit signs necessary to be able to get out of the thing, right? We also get specialized directional lighting and markings for transportation. This could be leaving a parking garage in a multifamily building, and maybe you have lights that let you know a pedestrian is coming up, or that spotlight pedestrians coming up. That could make a lot of sense in a circumstance like that. We don't want to create issues where things are unsafe for folks. Sorry about that. Advertising signage, directional signage, theatrical purposes, some of these are less germane to that multifamily question. Athletic playing areas, that's definitely one that can come up there as well, right? Tennis courts, pickleball courts, things like that that you might have associated with an R2. Temporary lighting, event lighting, things like that. These are all places where we might look at specifically with that R2 lens and say, okay, we're going to figure out how we're going to address this issue of additional power. Public art, monuments, and the national flag. Once again, I will highlight for you that that is specific to the national flag. I know a lot of developers that have, maybe multiple monuments around, like a parking circle or something like that, traffic circle, I should say, that have, state flags, their own flag, their icon, whatever it is. And so, again, having a clear definition of how you want to handle that policy, making sure that it's either specific to the national flag, or if you're looking at addressing this or adopting it, making any alterations that you want to be more pluralistic. Definitely this is a place where I think it's worth highlighting. So just so somebody doesn't make the wrong choice, whatever they end up doing, or, misinterpreting that to be more broad than it is. Water features, swimming pools, definitely germane to that R2 question as well. And then obviously lighting controlled from within dwelling units. So that's going to be an important one that we'll get to more towards the end of the presentation for the lighting components, because you still have your exterior lights on people's porches and things like that, and those are going to correspond to those dwelling unit related controls out of the IECC. So it's going to be a little more specific than that. So what changed in the 24 in all of these exceptions? Well, in 7, we get lighting in any location used for video broadcasting, not anything particularly specific to a R2 configuration. But if there are, for instance, Some areas with apartments and maybe a wedding venue or something like that, where there is, any equipment, anything like that, maybe this is a place that might come up. There's a few different ways to look at that. Sleeping units, and then lighting that's required by the IBC in and of itself. So we get a little bit more clarification about those things. So here we see a exterior lighting plan, right? So we're looking at this from a commercial perspective. We've got a large parking lot serving a large commercial building. And here might be an example of what we're getting for our lighting compliance certificate, where we have our parking areas, we have our units for wattage installed, and we get a clarification of how good this passes beyond code. Now, if you had your druthers, this might be a place, depending on which code you're on and how much of a role your zoning department plays, if they can help review this document by requiring it and receiving it, or if you're taking any other pathway like a simulated building performance pathway. You can also produce a lighting certificate that's very similar to this. But, demonstrating that and showing that this is in compliance might be a way to make sure that your requirements align, that you're not approving this saying, well, you passed your exterior lighting comm check, but your zoning department saying, yeah, but you still have, the wrong amount of lighting for our needs or our requirements or our zoning resolution, making it very clear that you guys aren't, doing the same review or supporting each other with that, distinguishing that, those are the kind of concerns that as you look at adopting this code that I would have from an administrative standpoint. So then when we jump over to the 2024, things look a little bit different when we ask that same question of going to R404.1 and asking, how do I handle exterior lighting? Well, this has a different pointer. Remember, the first one we looked at said, hey, if you're residential and you're multifamily, just go to C405. Just go over to the commercial code and start using that. This reads a little bit differently, and it says R2, R3, R4 buildings are going to comply with these section 404.1.2 through 1.5. And then we get our same exceptions for the most part here, that are, hey, we're going to exempt our single family dwellings, our townhouses, solar powered related lamps, motion sensor lamps, other luminaries that comply in this particular section. So now we're saying, hey, if you're multifamily, we're not going to send you to the commercial code. We're going to have you use these provisions so long as you still fit the residential definition of the IECC. So really important change there for that pointer in the way that it works. So now in the 24, if you're above 4 stories or you don't fit that typical parameter of that residential building, great, go work with the commercial section of the code. If you are, stay here and continue to read. Now, let's see here. There it goes. We get a lot of similar language to what we saw in the commercial code as far as you have a maximum power allowance, you have exceptions to that power allowance for a few things, and they are much more tailored to the actual needs of multifamily buildings rather than all the ones that I just read off to you, right? So these are specific to our lighting approved for safety. Remember, again, this isn't italicized here, but it should be, in my opinion, because it is a defined term and it does require discretion of the building official to demonstrate that it is approved, but neither here nor there. We also have athletic playing fields, right? We talked about that earlier. Specialized signals, exit lights, temp lighting, public art, monument, national flag. Again, that national flag thing did not change between the 21 and the 24. So you can see that they've sort of parsed this out specifically to what's important for multifamily. And so we get a similar chart to what we looked at earlier, but remember, this is still in that table R404. So we're looking at this saying, okay, go to the power allowances right down here. And then we're going to, this is a little clunky the way that it's written too, I will tell you. The first thing we get is, hey, stay here, read these sections. And then before we get to the rest of those sections, we get the lighting power allowances table. It's a little clunky, it's a little off on the way that it's written, in my opinion. And we get this base power allowance right out of the gate, right? And then we also get these other areas that can be associated for our power allowances, for building exteriors. So that's in high level, sort of those differences in the way that the overall setup is between these two codes and the way that it's going to work between them. Then we kind of get back to dovetailing on some things with exterior lighting controls. A lot of this has remained very similar, right? We have automatic daylight shutoff. We don't want to run the system if daylight can handle it. Decorative lighting shutoff has this 1 hour capability, right? So it gets sort of a set point associated with it. And then lighting setback can be reduced by 30% from midnight to 6 a.m. or 1 hour after closing, or no activity after 15 minutes. Now, a lot of that you would typically see associated with some of those business occupancies, but remember, with podium type construction, you can have that sort of same issue where you're going to have your business occupancies and your residential tied directly to it. In 404.1.4, in the residential section in the 24, we get an equivalent amount of wattage per square foot, that 0.075, for building facades as well to be illuminated. So this sort of dovetails with what was already in the commercial sections that we just looked at a moment ago, but we just add this in for specificity because once again, we are talking about these instances where we are, instead of sending people the commercial code, keeping them here and giving them all the parts that they need to navigate the multifamily question. So again, here we're seeing some exterior lighting components and controls and kind of questioning, okay, do we have the information that we need? Okay, we see a timer located right up here. Timer would work. Timer is a valuable option to be able to use for this. That can go, right? So our time switch function, if we're going to use something like this, we get a 7-day clock. We've got some basics associated with this for its automatic shut-off features, has to recognize holidays, has to have manual override, and then control light has to be 2 hours or less, and illuminating areas less than 5,000 square feet. So on our plans, we should typically have some sort of lighting control narrative that's going to tell us, okay, where are these mounted? For instance, here we have an exterior mounted relay switch, and it's running off of that astronomical clock for sunset and sunrise. Right, so it's recognizing those things there. We also have vestibules, another place where we might have that common area question, right? As you come into your R2, you might have a lobby with a vestibule. That vestibule needs to be recognized accordingly for its lighting as well, and provided in this particular chart, they're kind of breaking down each and every step along this and giving us that relevant sequence so we can know as the plans examiner, great, I have what I need. This whole thing for this project works in terms of its required controls, and it makes it really easy for the folks out in the field that have to go and figure that out to make sure that what was installed is accurate. So when we talk about common areas, we do have a couple of other items to bring up. If we're talking about the commercial code here, I'm going to take you to C409616. And basically here it's the exceptions that I want to point out for you for our maximum miscellaneous loads. So when we're talking about dwelling units, you get 0.42 watts per square foot for any additional maximum miscellaneous equipment load. But multifamily common areas have none. So just to be perfectly clear, when you look at that miscellaneous equipment item, and you're looking at those R2s that don't fit that parameter of being in the residential section, make sure that no one's claiming additional miscellaneous load for those common areas. And then again, for common areas here, right, where we talk about R2 occupancy spaces and interior lighting systems, these are areas that are outside of the dwelling unit itself, but again, serve those common area uses. Those can be our laundry rooms, right, dining areas, seating areas. Maybe you have a little movie theater area or something like that. A small gym is super common to provide in a condo space or things like that. These are some of the areas listed here where we're going to say, okay, the occupancy sensor requirements are also going to be part of your conversation. So now let's step completely out of the building and let's talk about the parking garage lighting controls. So we have some small updates to this in terms of location, moving that over to C405.2.9, and we explain that, okay, our interior parking areas are going to follow our requirements, but between the 21 and the 24, there are very limited changes in this. So we are going to be controlling that overall amount of light, decreasing the amount of luminaries that are going to be running fully, and dropping that by that 50% threshold here. So this is kind of your summary slide of all of that code, so you don't have to read it all at once. But you can be on an occupancy sensor or a time switch. You're going to reduce to that 30%, no less than 20 minutes. Zones can be bigger than 3,600 square feet. Entrance and exit separation lighting. Let's see here. Sorry, I need to move one of my windows because I can't read my slide with my own face looking at me there. There we go. For eye adaptation to 50%. So that's basically saying, hey, okay, it's really dark in here. As you step out onto the street, if you want to add additional lighting to make sure that it's a safe transition, that can be done. That does make sense, right? So you're not just getting blasted by a spotlight, because Lord knows I've had that happen to me a couple of times. And if you have like an astigmatism like I do, then yeah, good luck seeing for like a good 10 seconds trying to make a blind turn, right? So we're just trying to keep that a little bit more safe. And now we're on to fuel gas lighting equipment. So in the 21 and the 24, basically both of them have the same provision that you can't have a continuously burning pilot light. The 24, well, one thing that I do want to bring up on this is who inspects that issue. Is it your mechanical inspector who's looking at the gas piping? Do you have somebody in your shop that is specific to energy and sustainability who will be reviewing sort of final equipment? Is that done at final building by your general building inspector? Who is going to be responsible for identifying and facilitating this inspection on gas lighting equipment to make sure that it's functional and that it's not equipped with the continuously burning pilot light. Now, the good thing is that because we've had 2 iterations of code cycles in which continuously burning pilot lights for gas lighting have been prohibited, a lot of manufacturers have come up with solutions for that. And now in the 24, we get defined terms for every one of these, which are on-demand pilot light, intermittent ignition, and interrupted ignition, which also tells me that the manufacturing industry is specifying exactly which of their products will fit which of these definitions. And because there's more than one, there's more than one way to go about doing this. Folks are exploring this space and coming up with, logical, sensible solutions to this to be able to provide this lighting. Now, the other thing that I want to bring up is depending on if you've looked at the MLECC, that's the Model Low Energy and Carbon Code from the Colorado Energy Code Board. Gas lighting has been one of those things that a lot of folks have said, like, hey, we don't need, it's not used very often, so maybe just prohibiting it outright makes sense. I know a number of places have made recommendations to that effect, so it is one of those things I'd like to just highlight for you and mention that, this is another code section that if you have some, parts of the neighborhood, HOAs that, maybe require this sort of thing, or businesses that like to use it as well, that they have clear guidance on whether or not they can, depending on what you end up adopting or moving forward with as you look at that 24 transition, or if you're staying on the 21, how you're going to handle, these new defined terms, if you want to borrow them out of the 24, how you want to go about doing that. So energy metering, right? So we haven't had too much. These are all new in the 21. I want to be very clear. So this blue language came out of the 21 code, where we're looking at basically energy monitoring and energy metering. Now, Colorado's also got its own thing going, right? So a lot of folks are familiar with the energy monitoring and building performance requirements from previous actions from the Colorado Energy Code Board. And so I don't want to try and confuse those at all. I just want to bring up a couple of things here specific to the energy metering and monitoring as they relate to the 24 code and as you look at maybe what your next steps are. Specifically when it comes to energy metering, you can submeter specifically for exterior energy use and some of these other items for that kind of tracking. That is enumerated in the tables below this here. The other things that were added in the 24 included some data collection related updates, some surface water heating related updates, and some renewable energy specific submetering and non-electric submetering. So that's kind of the big stuff that's changed here. If you haven't looked at this in a while, or it's just kind of been on autopilot because it's like, oh, well, we have the state program, and you're familiar with that. It's just worth taking a look at and familiarizing yourself with the differences between these two. So new to the 2024 code 405.15, we have on-site renewable energy. And so this is a requirement to add renewables to buildings with some express exceptions where you have low solar radiation, and I didn't include the whole definition in the code here because it was really long to basically describe something that said you can't get enough solar radiation, and it needs to be that long, it needs to be that specific, but saying you can't get enough solar radiation to kind of justify the installation of the assembly, right? Another one here is 80% of the roof space has permanent obstructions. So again, we can't put enough of a system on there to be able to justify, the full installation. If the building is shaded naturally for 50% for more than 2,500 annual hours, as it's kind of analyzed there, if you're looking at that and saying, "Hey, I sit in the shade of a mountain. There is no way, like I can put as many solar panels on this building as you want, and still won't capture any sun because sun doesn't hit here except for like, a couple hours and a few months of the year." Well, they're going to take that under consideration to say, okay, these are exceptions to the on-site renewable question. And then your gross conditioned floor area less than 5,000 square feet. Now, if you fit these exceptions, or you can add some, but you can't get the full amount that you are supposed to out of C40515, then the code points you to another direction, which is offsite renewable energy. And it says, okay, if you can't do that, then you're going to buy some additional on-site renewable or offsite renewable energy. And it has specifics on how long the contract is supposed to last, that it's 10 years, must survive a partial or full transfer or ownership of property. So there are some parameters here to really look at and familiarize yourself with, especially as you look at, once again, the MLECC, that's the Colorado Energy Code Board's recommendations, and just making sure that you understand the way on-site renewables and off-site renewables are going to fit in this overall conversation about the energy code as a whole. So don't forget, we also have pools, spas, and all of this fun stuff. So we're going to hit these fairly quickly. So pool heaters, we're going to go to C404.8.1. It requires an on or off switch. The on or off switch cannot be the breaker. It has to be a specific switch within 3 foot of the location or ready access. And gas-fired heaters, once again, can't have those continuously burning pilot lights. So we're back to the same issue of using those definitions out of the 24 for intermittent, on demand. There's a few different ways to look at those pilot light issues. Now that they have definitions, that's kind of clarifying about exactly how to handle that. Time switches for pool heaters and monitors can be added as well. However, there are exceptions if you have a requirement from a public health perspective that a pool needs to be in 24-hour pump operation, or you get a percentage, 75% of your solar, of the energy needed in order to run that pool heater from solar energy or waste heat recovery systems, renewables, that sort of thing. The important thing to remember there is it is specific to the use of that pool, not just the overall building. So that gets a little bit more clarified in the 24 as well. In pool covers here in the 21 and the 24, right, we can see that we get that clarification. So we have the covers definition on both sides here. Not a lot of that has changed. In the 21, we see, okay, we have this 75% of the energy used for heating, not less than 3 calendar months, is from a heat pump or on-site renewable energy system. You don't have to be required to install that cover. And so we keep that same sort of language, but we also add the on-site renewable energy used to meet C40515. So that's what we were just looking at a second ago to say your building needs just renewables in the first place, can't be used to meet this exception. So once again, this is specific renewables to cover the pool. Your pool and spa standards, if you have to look at those, you're going to be looking at this APSP 14 and 15. Specifically, 14 is for portable spas or some of those things. 15 is for permanent. So again, if you're looking at this from that residential perspective and you're in that multifamily R sort of scenario here, then same thing. We're looking at similar control related items, similar issues with the pilot light not being non-continuous for its burn, and you can't use the circuit breaker for the switch necessary to turn off the heater. You can use time switches and you get the exact same sort of exemptions here. So a lot of duplication in these places for alignment between these two codes. And again, same thing on your covers or vapor retarders going over that pool cover. So in large part, a lot of similar requirements. And your energy consumption will comply with the APSP 15 as we discussed. So now let's move over to heating the outside or adding those cool appliances on the outside people love to use. If you do, first of all, you have to use a radiant system in order to be able to heat that space. Radiant systems can be a number of different, types of system. They have to be able to turn off by themselves, using that occupancy sensor, or a timer switch for shutdown. But they can be electric resistance heating. They can be fuel gas systems. They can be fuel-fired systems. There's a number of different ones out there for heating exterior spaces, like this fireplace right here, but these are the parameters for them. They do have to be able to shut off by themselves. They can't be left running. For snow and ice melt systems, notice here what I've done is just on both of these, I'll go back a slide for you. I've put the slash in here because they're literally identical between these two codes. So once again, there's a lot of alignment here. And so 40391 and 403.14.1, depending on if you're in residential or commercial respectively, are very much the same, along with R40392 or C403.14.2 when we talk about snow melt systems. They have the same requirements for its automatic shutoff when we're talking about that 50 degrees or greater and no precipitation is falling there. And they can be turned off automatically. They can also be run manually, right? So there's a number of different sort of items there with your controls. On roof gutter and de-icing systems, again, we get the same sort of items between the two codes, and we get some specific items for our controls. So again, that 40 degrees, or we can use a moisture sensor, daylight sensor, right, for either of these options for controls. And we get that shut off trigger point there. Last but not least, we also have deep similarity there between R40394 and C403.14.4 on freeze protection for systems as well. So if we have that outdoor piping, heat exchangers, those sorts of things, then we get our set points for shutoff, as well as identifying when conditions that liquid will not freeze. So we get some specificity there that aligns between both codes. And that is basically the large part of our presentation for today. So to wrap things up for you, remember, we just finished number 2 of these. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate your guys' time. Please continue to spread the word about these. We really want to continue to get our training series up. So yesterday we just finished our residential mechanical, electrical, and service water heater provisions out of the 24. The next we do is 24 residential efficiency packages. So that's going to be that R408 section in all of its glory, and there is a lot to it. So I am definitely nose to the grindstone on getting that class prepared for you. So if you want to learn about that on the 24th with me next Tuesday, please go ahead and register. We'll have a great time talking about it. We're also looking at putting together a nice technical document that'll help you walk through that particular item, make life a little easier for you. After that week, we're going to have Manual J, D, and S in the field. That's going to be with 4 states to join us. So please jump in. That'll be myself and the incomparable Jesse Sorensen who will be helping me teach that one here. We'll basically be breaking down each of these manuals as you read them and use them, and then discuss how they impact your field inspections, how they impact noting things like additional efficiency packages and credits, and how to navigate some of those important processes here. And then last but not least, we'll be finishing up with our commercial training series. These will be taught by Miss Hope Medina. She's got them set for you July 8th to the end of July, again, Tuesdays, 8 a.m. to noon. So we're giving you 4-hour trainings for free with CEUs. This series will cover commercial training from thermal envelope, lighting and power. Mechanical will actually be done by Miss Anna McCullough of Group 14, an absolute expert on mechanical and performance related issues. And then finishing up with commercial additional efficiency packages. So some majorly important components there. And again, please jump on and register for those. Send them to your staff. A lot of folks really are needing to get their hands dirty with the 24 and get to know this code intimately. And we're hoping we'll give you a good opportunity to spend some time with us, ask your questions, get to know this as much as you like. We have the code helpline. You can ask any question about any code that you want. If you have an issue and you want a second opinion, we are here to help you free of charge. Just use that QR code. It'll take you right to the website and you can submit your question. You'll get an answer from myself, Hope, Robbie, Shauna. There's a bunch of amazing people here that all support the Colorado Codes Helpline as a joint initiative between Colorado Energy Office and Excel to support any questions that you have. You'll have a survey after this. Please take the 5 minutes for the survey. I know it's a little bit of your time after you've just given me an hour, but truly it helps us keep the program alive. It helps us let those folks know that the money that they're spending to keep all this going, to support us making technical documents and training for you is well spent. And if there are things that we could be doing better, please let us know because it's definitely the kind of thing that we want to include in our training. And with that, my name is Andre. I am at the bottom there. If you want to send me an email or catch up with me about anything, ask any questions, feel free to ask away. You also have Hope Medina there, who's been running this program for a good long time and is always happy to support and help you with any of your questions. So it looks like we got a minute or two more. If anyone wants to ask anything, feel free to jump off of mute and let's have some good conversation if you like.
Thanks, Andre.
Thank you, Kylie.
Hey, Andre. I
Hey,
just
what's
had
going
a
on?
just had a quick question. Are these eligible? Can we get CEUs for these?
Yes. Yes, you can.
How do I get them?
So you should be getting, and I apologize if you have not. Let me do a stop share here. I apologize if you have not. Let me know what classes you've attended. I will go back through and see if you just weren't added to the list when we sent out our certificates. But yeah, every one of these is
Oh, good.
eligible for our CEUs.
Sure. And I did the envelope that you presented last, and then this one.
Oh, okay.
And then I plan to, of course, take the following classes in the series.
Perfect. Yeah, so the envelope one I sent out to our admins in California yesterday, got all the register lists and got everything processed with ICC and all that, and with AIA, because we get some architects on here as well. So usually it's a couple of weeks before you start getting your certificates. But if you attend something and you don't get it, I mean, that's exactly why I'm here to help. So give it a couple of weeks. If you don't hear from us, let me know and I will hunt it down.
Or I'm curious if these get entered into my my account. Sometimes they do that.
Yeah, we don't typically enter them directly into ICC like that. You're my ICC. We will give you the certificate for you to be able to add it, and we will add the class so that way ICC knows you attended, and in case they want to audit you or, check in on your attendance, they'll be able to see that, yes, we have you on a registrant roll, we have you on an attendance roll and all of that stuff. So we can show that you did what you were supposed to. Um,
That's wonderful. I appreciate your help with that.
yeah, yeah, not at all. No
Okay,
problem.
take care, man.
All right, you guys too.
All right.
All right, all. I'm not seeing anybody else jumping off. Let's see. Oh, Brian, let's see here. Unfortunately, until renewables are as efficient as historic energy sources, a new code will result in significant increases in construction costs, which we as design professionals and builders are blamed for. Yeah, Brian, I can't disagree with that. And I was reading the other day that it's something like 40% of all installed renewable energy systems will be obsolete and needing to be removed or replaced in the next like 5 years. I can't disagree with that statement. It's genuinely of concern. And so there's been, multiple different takes on the whole renewables question, and I don't see it as a problem, as an option for folks. This code, obviously moving it to a requirement is a very new and different thing. So, yeah, point well taken, Brian. All right, all. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in or anyone jumping off of on the chat. Oh, Juan, did you want to say something? Nope, I saw you come off of mute there, but I can't hear you if you're talking. All right, well, it's a minute past. I'm gonna go ahead and shut it down. But as always, if you need anything, you guys have my email. You guys know how to reach me, and we're always happy to support you. You guys have a great rest of your day.